technology neophyte, but he's not, real savvy either. So it was challenging him a couple of times too. But William, I'm ready to roll when you are. If we want to go ahead and get things started.
Okay. All right, just bear with us, guys. It's going to go silent for a minute.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome aboard. For those that haven't been here before or don't know me, my name is John Davis. Go by JD. I'm the host of the For the Good of the Game podcast. We are very pleased to have William Moorfield, the King of Stream, our producer, on hand tonight. And we want to thank Prep Spin for producing and hosting the show and maybe during the spot. We have two very special guests tonight, and we're going to spend some time, about an hour or so, talking about building program culture and team character. And just for the context of our listeners, I am going to 2 minutes here to kind of get set up with some intro for our guests. Coach Mark Evans just completed his 8th season as the head football coach at Manheim Township High School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In 2019, his Blue Streaks finished their fourth undefeated regular season in school history and their third Lancaster Lebanon League Section 1 championship in a row before finishing 11-1 in the District 3 semifinals. Prior to Township, Mark was the head football coach at Eastern Lebanon County High School. In his 14 years of leading the Elko Raiders, his teams earned a section championship in 2000 and competed in the District 3 playoffs 4 times. Coach Evans played college football at the University of Miami, where he was a member of 2 national championship football teams in 1987 and 89, and had the pleasure of being coached by both Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson. It is, however, his prowess in building and sustaining excellence for over 22 years as a head coach on and off the field that prompted this visit. Coach Justin Lustig currently serves as the assistant head coach, special teams coordinator, and outside wide receivers coach for Syracuse University Orange football team. He was a 2018 Broyles Award nominee as the nation's top assistant coach. Justin played college football at Bucknell University, where he was a 4-year starter and senior captain. He's been on the staffs at multiple D1 programs, including Eastern Illinois, Villanova, and Ball State, each of whom enjoyed success under his tutelage. However, accomplishment I'd like to highlight for the purpose of Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference PSAC West Coach of the Year and the National Division II Coach of the Year for orchestrating the single largest single season turnaround in D2 football history. And coaches, I want to welcome both of you here tonight and appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to be with us.
Great to be here.
Thank you,
JD.
Thanks for having us.
But yeah, we saw evidence right there, Coach. There you go. I was interested in looking up the stats because I think most people, when they do searches on Google, tend to go at NCAA level or CFB football level, but I could not find evidence, even on Auburn run, where they came short of a national championship. I don't think there's been even a Division I run that was quite as large as what you guys had at Edinburgh, Coach. Are you aware? Was that all NCAA or just D2?
Yeah, what we found out was so the Montana State in I want to say in the '70s had a bigger turnaround than us. There was one other example of a program that had a bigger turnaround, and then I think that was it at the college level. I'm not sure high school wise. I'm sure there's been some examples of some as good or bigger turnarounds at the high school level.
Well, what I want to do is I want to go back and I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between the two of you and take a line of questioning, kind of starting from the beginning a little bit and building toward what you've seen as coaches now in the programs that you've been a part of. So, Mark, starting with you, when you were at Miami, and I don't think you and I have really talked about this in detail, but when you were at Miami, was there something programmatically or something with the coaches that you had a chance to work with and be coached by that you would say contributed to some of the philosophy that you've carried forward, that you use today as a high school head coach?
100% in regards to I coach today the way I was coached by outstanding coaches like Tony Wise and Art Kehoe, who are big offensive line guys in the game, and obviously the demeanor of Jimmy Johnson and the things that he brought to the table, and Dennis Erickson are certainly has impacted me as a head coach. I believe that my experiences with them. What did I see back then? That's 30 years ago, 35 years ago. You're really testing my brain here. I felt like each coach brought a different style. I think Jimmy Johnson was a no nonsense. He was a straightforward, straight shooter, and I think Dennis Erickson was much more relaxed in terms of the players concept, players coach type thing. So I kind of took a little bit of both of their styles and brought them as I continue to develop my coaching repertoire. That's a big word right there, repertoire. But
For an O-line guy, especially.
yeah, I know. Well, you used some big words earlier before we got started on this, so I figured I had to show that I had some vocabulary. Miami is the Harvard of the South. Um, it's funny, and I think Coach Lustig would speak to this too. Is that each experience that you have from being a player to a coach, and the stops that you've made, it continues to define you. And I think even as a 22-year veteran head coach, I'm still growing and evolving and adapting to not only the players but the ever-changing part of the game. So I don't know if I've answered your question 100%, but I feel like those guys had a really strong influence and gave me a great base to being a better football coach.
No, I think you did, Coach. Looking back at your time at Bucknell, it's unique that, especially nowadays, to run across someone that was a 4-year starter. Unique that, one, they stay 4 years, and two, that they started for all 4 years. But what about your time there as a player?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Coach Evans, what he mentioned, that was the first thing that popped into my mind when you asked the question was, how much you gather from each stop that you're at. And I'm talking about, like, I remember my grade school coach was Victor Tripolzi, right? Like 5th grade, first time I played football. And I remember the first couple of practices, we practiced without a ball, like no balls. And he had the ball bag zipped up and said, you know what, guys, we're going to learn how to tackle and we're going to learn how to block. And that's all we did for like the first 3 or 4 practices. And I remember coming home and saying, I don't know if I want to play football. My head's kind of ringing. But you learn stuff all the way through. And from 5th grade on all the way through, I played for Minna George at Cathedral Prep in Erie, Pennsylvania. And he was kind of a legendary coach and has passed away since, but learned a lot from him. And then getting back to your specific question about Bucknell, I had the opportunity to play for a guy named Tom Gadd. He was our head coach, and he had been at a bunch of Power 5 bigger programs. He was the D coordinator at South Carolina, defensive coordinator at Minnesota, and had a lot of success there and decided he wanted to be a head coach. But learned from a lot of guys there. And the interesting thing about being at Bucknell at the time, it was kind of a launching pad for a lot of younger coaches. So, for example, Derek Mason, the current head coach at Vanderbilt, he was at Bucknell while I was there. Dave Katalski, who was the defensive coordinator at Stanford at one point. Lance Anderson, who's the current defensive coordinator at Stanford. And then the list goes on and on. Joe Lombardi's the offense coordinator for the Saints. So I got to learn from a lot of great guys while I was playing. But the one thing I'd say about my Bucknell experience is Coach Gadd. Coach Gadd was tough. He was disciplined. Those two things for sure I learned from. And then to give you a specific example, when I was a head coach, you're first-time head coach, trying to come up with ideas to motivate your players, especially like a Friday night before a game or a Saturday right before the game in the locker room. And I used a lot of stuff that Coach Gadd did. And one thing that I remember from Coach Gadd, I didn't use this specific one, but I remember him eating grass on the field at Colgate. And we did a walkthrough on Friday, and he said, this is going to be our turf tomorrow, and just grabs a hunk of grass, Colgate, throws it in his mouth and swallows it. And, so there's so many cool experiences that I've had along the way that I've learned from. But certainly the experiences at Bucknell have stayed with me for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know that. I wanted to start there, relevant to tonight's discussion, because when you start talking about building culture and team character, there are some distinctions, but there are pieces of the equation that feed each other. So in my mind, when we're looking at culture, and it's interesting because I just finished going through a 6-week leadership and coaching program with Changing the Game Project and John O'Sullivan. They do some work. And Dr. Jerry Lynch was a part of that coaching staff, and Jerry's coached with, it's unbelievable the amount of people, programs that he's worked with. And they talked about, developing what your core principles are. And that's how you help establish your culture. And then from a character standpoint, it tends to reach more into the individual contribution of your athletes and leans more toward doing the right thing. So from a culture standpoint, and Mark, I'll start with you. When you were at Elko, going through that initial 14-year stint as a head coach, and then launching into and transitioning over to Mannheim, what kind of culture things did you know going into Elko you wanted to do from your previous experience, and or was there a fairly good culture to start with that you were opportunistically able to build upon?
Well, I think there was a base at Elko before I got there. We were everybody's homecoming game when I first started there, and I always said you couldn't spell welcome without Elko in the middle of it. And after a couple of years, they stopped scheduling that for homecoming. So that was one of our goals. I think the biggest part that comes back to is relationship building. When you're changing culture and when you're talking about when you're coming into a new situation, it's just, reaching out to the kids and developing that positive relationship with them. And I think that was probably the biggest thing that we've experienced when I've gone from Elko to Township, and just getting to know the kids and getting to know them at their level. It's a whole different ball game nowadays in terms of how we coach, and we develop those strong relationships with them both on the field and off the field. And they really don't care how much you care until they know, or how much you know until they know how much you care. I don't know if I've got that 100%, but basically when you talk about going to a program that, there weren't a whole lot of high expectations at Elko. And we went from 5-5 my first season at Elko to 1-9, where we ended up just having the war of attrition hit. And again, trying to build it my way, or our way at the time, our staff and what we went in and did. I inherited a really tremendous group of kids. My first year as a head football coach, I had the pleasure of being an assistant the year before. So I had already built the relationships with those kids. And then the next year's class kind of came in, and we kind of went with the youth movement through the war of attrition and guys and took some lumps, went 1-9. And then the next year we went 9-1 and shared the section championship. I was nodding when Coach Lustig talked about his turnaround. We've all been there, and it's pretty fun to see you go from the bottom where you don't know anything to all of a sudden now you do know something. And but it all boils down to relationships. And I really work hard on building those relationships both on the field and off the field. And I want the kids to know I want to be their go-to guy, and still maintain a lot of great relationships with my players from Elko. One of my former players just graduated from law school the other day. So, those are things that are meaningful and memorable. And you never know what kind of young man you're working with until about 5 or 10 years after the fact. And I think Coach Lustig could agree with that too. Even at the college level, you don't know your work. You won't see the benefit of your work until 4 or 5 years after the fact. And seeing those things are awesome. So I don't know if I've 100% answered the question to you, or answered the question as a whole, but the relationship piece is a big part of it.
No, I think you did exactly, and I'm gonna twist the question a little bit for Coach Lustig because it's you obviously had some serious experiences prior to going to Edinboro, but in taking over a program that has been at the bottom. And full disclosure for anybody that's watching this, I have a son who played at Edinboro, actually left the year prior to Coach Lustig taking over, and oh, by the way, I'm also a Syracuse alum. So I prior to tonight, we've not met face to face, albeit electronically, but that connection help establish the relationship. But when you go into a college situation, Coach, you don't necessarily, other than reading and listening, have the and watching film, have the advantage of the groundwork of those relationships going in. So what did you draw from your previous jobs going into Edinboro that said, that kind of guided you? Okay, here's what I want to do, laying the groundwork for the proper culture to win.
Yeah, well, I think when you talk about culture, for me, it's like it's everything, right? It's so full and encompasses everything that you do, and on and off the field. And I think that gets back to Coach Evans too. Like it's not just on the field, right? It's off the field. What are you doing in your not only your day life, but your night life, and what's going on at home, and getting to know everybody. And so, but getting back to your question, what have I kind of brought with me? I think one of the things, you can never be prepared to be a head coach until you're a head coach. I don't know if Coach Evans would agree with that, but
100%.
But you try. And along the way, I've always kept a notebook on, at every stop, these are the things that I've learned from this head coach that I really like, and this is how, if I do get this opportunity, I'm going to run this area of our program. And so going through it, like going to Villanova, I think the thing that stood out there is got to work for Andy Talley, who's a legend and won a lot of games and the most winning coach in Villanova history. But one of the things that stood out with him is his attention to the outside of the program, the constituents that are affecting his program. So whether that be fans, whether that be professors on campus, whether that be parents, he was always working the phone, always trying to build relationships, not only with his players, but with the fans, with the boosters, with the alumni, and how valuable that is, and how that can affect your program in so many different ways. So we certainly stole that or took that from Coach Talley. And then I would say at Ball State, Pete Lembo is a master organizer. I mean, like, best I've ever been around. Schedules 2 years in advance, practice schedules down to the second. Very detailed about what his assignments are for his staff. And so certainly took that part of the culture came from him, being maybe very anal about the managerial side of it. I could go on and on about all the things that I've learned at all the stops, but those two stand out. And then, maybe at Eastern Illinois, I would say Coach Spoo, one of the best people I've ever been around. And again, getting back to Coach Evans, it's interesting because it really does come back to relationships, but caring about people, like really caring about people. When I first got hired at Eastern Illinois, my first day on the job was the Friday before spring break. So I was in the office with the whole staff, got to meet everybody, hadn't met everybody in the office, and then everybody goes on spring break and is gone. So I stay in the office for the week, and my mother ends up helping my wife and I move in. We have a young child. and Coach Spoo finds out that my mother's going to be in town and takes us out to dinner, right? Like, I've only known the guy for 3 days. He takes us to actually the Chinese buffet is where he took us. But he just cared about you on and off the field as a coach. And then I think that trickles down to the coaches caring about their players on and off the field as well.
When you were at, a lot of people probably don't, because the world of college football revolves around Division I most of the time, and they don't understand the limitations and challenges. A lot of people aren't even aware that Division III colleges don't offer athletic scholarships. Division II, I think you can offer 35 or
Yep.
36 scholarships.
Yep.
I know when my son was at Edinboro, I think they had 10 of those 36 fully funded.
Okay.
So it's not like you're sitting on the kind of money that you see the Alabamas and the Texases
No.
and all that kind of stuff. So when you start talking about operating within constraints at that Division II level, it really gets back more like you would experience at a smaller school, or maybe even in some cases at a high school, where you have to rely on those relationships that you just talked about. I would think.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I haven't even really considered that piece of it. But at Edinboro, we were doing everything, right? I remember Roger was the equipment manager for the entire athletic department, right? So we didn't really have a football equipment manager. He had to do everything. He wasn't going to be doing laundry for the football team, but he helped us. He gave me a key to the laundry room so we could do the coach's laundry, and we could get the players' laundry done during the winter when they were doing lifting and conditioning. And I think you hit the nail right in the head. I can think of a thousand examples of that, especially at Edinboro, where that's really important. And going into summer camp, we didn't have a lot of money, and we're trying to get the kids a fourth meal at night. You have a really hard practice, and you have dinner at 5:30, and you meet until 10 o'clock, and those boys are hungry, man. At 10 o'clock, when they got to be back in their dorms. But by reaching out to the community, and then all of a sudden the local restaurants are donating money or donating meals because you're caring about them, and you went and met them, or you brought your players over to introduce themselves. So yeah, those relationships are key and can affect you in a lot of different ways that you might not even think about.
Well, let's take a little turn toward directly into setting the stage for it. Mark, as you're transitioning out of Elko and coming in to take over the township program, what did you know you wanted to bring forward from a culture standpoint? What did you know you wanted to bring forward with you? And what opportunities did you see to develop something maybe new and exciting that you either heard about or had not had a chance to try at that point?
Well, first of all, transitioning from Elko to Township, you're talking about a huge step in terms of classifications at that time. Township was a double A school. Elko was a double A school. Township was a 4A school. Now we have six classifications in the state of Pennsylvania. I knew that I wanted to establish a clear and concise boundary where everyone was treated equally and fairly. And I do know that when you come into a program, it's the old saying when you went into the classroom, don't smile till Christmas. You come in and you take a solid approach of, this is how we're going to do business. Every man needs discipline. You would know that from your Army training, that
Sure.
you need to know where the line is. And we did Raider reminders at Elko when I first started. They were hurricane reminders when I was a player at Miami. And then we did blue streak reminders, which are basically an up down every 5 yards for 250 yards, with the coach giving you a 15-yard head start. And you don't have to do those too many times to know that there's a line you don't want to cross. And establishing those boundaries and those parameters were very important. I got hired at Township in the middle of June, so I had missed the entire spring of lead up time. It was one of those things where I came in and I hit the ground running, and we went and we did team camp, and we were doing a bunch of different stuff and just getting to know the guys, obviously watching some past film and knowing that Township had a strong program. And the biggest thing I wanted to do is get in there and get down on their level and get to know their stories. When you talk about relationship building, the big part, I think, as a school counselor as well, is getting to know each kid's story, because every kid comes to you with something different. Some kids might not have eaten that day. Some kids might not have had somebody tell them that they love them. So when you get into a new program and you're hitting the ground running, knowing that your back's against the wall with mid-June, getting your staff together was a priority. And then, getting to the kids. Number one thing I wanted to do as soon as I got hired was I wanted them to see leadership at the top. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do in any situation. From crisis leadership is you want to be visible, you want to be approachable, you want to be a force, or you want them to know who you are and that you're on the front lines. And we hit the ground running. I was going to see them work. I was driving twice a day from my home in Richland down and back, and it was like 45 minutes round trip. When you put it all together, and it was a rough time, and it was a good time though too. And we got through it. We thought, wow, we look back on it, how much we were driving and going back and forth from home to township and just being visible for the kids at their workouts. And I thought that was important. So the story piece is what I really hang my hat on. As far as every kid has a different story, and trying to get to know their stories is priority number one for me. So I don't have, could you have
No,
I
you
hit
did.
the whole question as far as kind of lost my train of thought. I started to get all excited. I was like, oh, did I answer the question? I keep asking myself, asking you guys, did I answer the question?
No, you're good, coach. You're good. And I guess maybe I can feel a little bit more of the pain that, from at least an ethereal standpoint, Coach Lustig, when you talk about having lived through a couple of years, watching Tyler play at Edinburgh, getting to know the coaches, the players, and then seeing the program from the inside out. Coming in when you did, knowing that you were taking over a team that had gone 0-11, what did you see as the single biggest hurdle that you had to overcome, whether if just from your own assessment or from things that someone told you or doing your research about the program?
Yeah, well, JD, I think that's a tough question for me. And the first thing that pops to mind is like that image of, I think everybody's seen it online, of that iceberg, right? And the tip of the iceberg is just this little tip that's popping out of the water. And up there you could write 9-2, Edinburgh, biggest turnaround ever. And underneath that damn iceberg is like a lot of issues, a lot of things that we had to deal with, right? And so there's not one thing that stands out, but I'll give you a couple of them. The first one, I was a brand new head coach. Being a head coach for the first time, and I thought I had plans for a lot of things, but I didn't have plans for everything. Not nearly for everything. There were things that came through my door that I never would have expected I would have had to deal with. So being a first-year head coach, the financial issues that the university and the football program had, and you mentioned that with the scholarship reductions and not being on the same plane as some of the other schools that you're competing against that might have more scholarships. A new staff, there were quite a bit of restrictions on being able to hire a new staff. And I think if you're a head coach or you're a leader going into something, and you can bring in all your own people that know exactly what you're all about, and they know exactly what you're going to expect of them, it's going to be a lot easier rather than, we kept half the staff that were there, and we really had to train them on what we wanted to do. So a lot of issues, and you just kind of had to. We were just dealing with them one by one and trying to grind away at them and do the best that we could.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I've had a chance to. I have only coached up to and including the high school level, but not having been a head coach. I have had the good fortune of working with and for several guys that really introduced me to exactly what it means to be a head coach. And of course, there's a lot of legends out there. But the interesting comment, I distinctly remember in 2005, I was on the floor of the Carrier Dome with Coach Paul Pasqualoni. We had just watched a practice, and I was absolutely blown away by the degree of organization in the execution of this practice. From warm-ups to indie to group to team, it was everything was spot on, orchestrated for 2 hours of nonstop motion. So he's coming off the field. He says, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Coach, the only one I can imagine right now is how long did it take you to get to the point where you knew this is how you wanted to run a practice?" And he kind of laughed and he said, "Well, I played for Joe Paterno at Penn State, and he said I was one of those guys that got in the game, if we were either down or up by 50 points. So I paid a lot of attention at various points during the game." And he said every day at practice, I took the practice schedule off the bulletin board and threw it in a notebook. So he said, by the time I got to when I was, where I am now, I had accumulated that Bible of things that I wanted to do, learning from all those other great coaches. And I think that's but to your point, Coach Lustig, I don't think any of us, and I'm certainly not speaking from experience, I don't think you can fully prepare for what it's going to be at any level when you take over as a head coach the first time.
No question. And, there's a book that comes to mind. It's called Only the Paranoid Survive. It's an old book that it was like the CEO of IBM back in the day wrote this book that, you got to be worried and you got to be a little bit on edge in order to have success. And I think that kind of lends to what you're saying, right? Like I was always concerned of what if this happens and what if this happens? Well, we got to be prepared for this and got to be prepared for this and got to be prepared for that and got to hit this in practice. And obviously I think that could go too far on one end of the spectrum, but that you made me think of that book and that idea that only the paranoid survive. But certainly Coach Pasqualoni's got a great reputation here.
Well, it was an interesting time to be there. That happened to be the weekend it was the weekend before they lost the game that ended up getting him fired. So it was kind of an interesting segue for him. But let me go back to something that I mentioned a minute ago. When you talk about culture and all those things that go into establishing the environment that you want to as a head coach, team and individual athlete character play a big part of that. What did you look for, Coach Lustig, when you were at any of the programs you were at, but certainly as a head coach at Edinboro? What did you look for and reinforce with your players to say, here are the standards that I expect you to maintain as an athlete at Edinboro University on this football team?
Well, I think that's a great point, and I think you have to clearly define what your standards are in all aspects of your program, right? Like, so for us, like my notebook is basically built into different sections. So there's a discipline section. There's a, touching the, local constituents of your program. There's a section on academics and how we're going to do academics. Like everything is everything. We used to say that to the Edinboro guys. Everything, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? I think I might have butchered that, Coach Evans, too, right? But my point is, I think you have to clearly define. So, for example, let's talk about the football part for us, toughness, right? We want to be a tough football team. Like we talked about being smart, reliable, and tough football team. Okay, you want to be tough. Well, are you practicing being tough? And are you clearly defining to your players what a tough guy is, right? For us, toughness was the ability to perform when you don't feel like it, right? And that could be your mom getting up. Your mom might be working 2 jobs, but she might be a tough ass that gets up and isn't late for work and gets up every morning and goes to work and comes home and feeds you and then does another job. That's a tough ass person, right? Not the guy that goes in the bar at 12 o'clock at night, on a game week and pushes somebody or headbutts somebody. That's not tough. The ability to perform when you don't feel like it. The guy that shows up all the time at 5:45 a.m. before a 6 a.m. workout, right? The guy that finishes all the sprints when he doesn't feel like it. So that was real important that we clearly defined all those things for the guys. And then like one of the words when you look up a definition of culture, I think the word that comes up a lot is custom, right? What are your customs, right? Whatever kind of organization you're in, but what are your customs? So we had a lot of customs at Edinboro. We have a lot of customs at Syracuse. So obviously picked up a lot of things along the way. And give you an example of that, we don't take a knee on the field ever. We don't bend at the waist when we're tired. All right, we care about our body language. Just all these little things that add up into how you approach everything. At Edinboro, another thing, you sit in the first 2 rows of our class. All right, when the coaches do class checks and they're walking around campus to make sure you're in class, you're sitting in the first 2 rows. So I think it's just really important that you have a set of parameters. And I think Coach Evans mentioned this earlier, but just these parameters that encompass all these different areas of your program. And that's really what's going to develop your culture. Not getting up in front of a room and saying, you know what, we're just going to be tough. We're going to kick everyone's ass. No, okay, we're going to have in the middle of practice, we're going to have a competition drill that's going to be really, really physical. And we're going to show that the next day and talk about the guys that were really tough. And this is what toughness is on film. And this is not tough. A guy not running to the ball in defense is not tough, right? So just clearly defining all those things and making sure that they also are hitting all these different areas of your athlete's life, right? And again, Coach Evans went back to, I keep thinking of things he said, but the relationship piece, well, if it's all you're doing is talking about football, you're really not caring about them, their whole person, right? And I think and ultimately, and this is kind of selfish, but it's going to affect your program, right? These kids they're going to jump off sides. If they can't sit in the first 2 rows of class, they're not going to be disciplined enough to do what you're asking them to do. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I do think that there is there's maybe a level or set of distractions that you deal with at the college level that you don't necessarily have, and it may boil down, Mark, to a little bit of control at the high school level. I mean, you do have a little more control of the student's day in terms of the high school schedule, and then going straight into practice or coming in the weight room in the morning and then going to class. But aside from that control element, if you will, what are you looking for to set the standard that you look to your athletes to be? Somebody in Township walks down the hall and says, "Oh, that's a football player because of the way he conducts himself."
Well, obviously, it's important that we talk about your demeanor in the classroom. We want to be the go-to guys in our school. If they need somebody to volunteer for something, I want our guys to jump on it. If they need something done, I want them to call on us, and it's being the go-to guys. As I mentioned, I want to be my guys' go-to guy. I want our people to look at our program as the model that we're willing, ready, and able to jump in and help and do work when we need to. And I think it goes back to the culture piece where what your leaders tolerate in your culture becomes acceptable. And I think year 3 has been the difference maker for me at both of my stops. I think my first year, it's still a growing year. We're still learning. And I think Coach Lustig, I've been taking notes and I appreciate everything he's saying. I'm learning and growing still too. And I love it. And I wrote down the book, Only the Paranoid Survive. I'm definitely going to look at that one. But I think when you talk about, it takes a couple of years for them to really know what you expect. And the other part right now, I see a lot of young people is that we are teaching grit. When you talk about toughness, you can't have toughness without grit and perseverance and overcoming obstacles in your path. And we have to teach that. We have to teach that whether it's in the school building, whether not getting it done academically, or whether it's something that's going on around them at home, or whether it's something that's happening on the field. So grit is a huge part of our culture. And I also empower my leaders. Their job is to make my job easier. So when you become a team captain, you have a certain set of standards. You eat last, you get off the bus last, you make sure the bus is cleaned up. And again, it's those expectations that I think take time. So if you look at from my stop at Elko to my stop at Township, where I'm at now, is year 3 was a difference maker, where you really start to see your program start to take shape. And I'm very blessed with having a great relationship with our school building people, administration, teachers, et cetera, and then community. At both stops, I've worked hard to build relationships, and they've worked hard to build relationships with me too, which is really important. I think sometimes people shy away from those opportunities to win a friend and influence a person. You talk about an old book, Coach. How about Dale Carnegie? How to win friends and influence people is any chance you can, you don't ever want to pass up that opportunity to teach. I call them teachable moments. And again, that's part of your culture. We mentioned standards. I don't have rules. I have standards. We have standards that we want to live up to. And in the days of old, I think all three of us have been in that situation where a coach might have grabbed your face mask or made gave you a few 4-letter words. You can't coach like that today. That kid might be coming to you, as I said before, about the story piece. Why are you late? In the past, I might have lost it and made them run. Now I want to find out what's going on. Before I jump or get excited or discipline, I want to know what's going on behind the scenes, that there might have been something happening at home or something that would have caused him to be late that I want to get to know. Hey, listen, I'm here to help you too. And you talk about coaches that you've gotten a chance to work for and meet. I've been blessed, having played for a guy like Dave Haight out at Scottsdale Community College way back when, the home of the Fighting Artichokes in 1985, and Gary Bach, who took me under their wings and really solidified my dream and desire to become an educator coach. And then having played for Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson, having worked for Rocky Reese, I coached in the PSAC 2 at Shippensburg for 3 years with Marty Schetzel, Bucknell guy, and Mercy Hurst, and the Erie connection is coming out here among all of us. I'm very blessed to have had those quality experiences, and then working for a gentleman coach, not only Jim Monis at Lebanon Valley College. So again, each stop I have grown and taken something from those guys and built those into the demeanor that I think I carry myself with. Sure, am I fired up? I think I was a little fired up, 10 or 15 years ago. I think as I get older, I just get a little bit more cerebral and it kind of just let's work through this. But when you talk about culture and program, I don't think you can have that without empowering your leaders to make your job easier and never passing up the opportunity to teach from that experience, whether it's a loss, whether it's a bad grade or a discipline problem in the school, is find something positive in every negative. And it goes back to that grit piece. I find that we're getting softer as a society, and I don't want to get on my soapbox here. I think Coach Davis, having a son in the military and having a son that played Division III football, and that was always I always kidded around. I would say I punch first and ask questions later, but you can't pass up an opportunity to teach about grit and perseverance. So those are huge parts of our program that I think are huge building blocks for our success.
Well, and I think that going back to the challenges of head coaching, and certainly the first time you do it, all of that in one way or another, whether it's specific to the relationships and what you want your players to portray with their individual behavior and their characters, or what you want the program culture to be reflective of. Every step of what you do contributes one way or another. There's another great book called Coaching by the Book by Randy Allen, the head coach at, oh my goodness, it went right out of my head. He's in Dallas. But anyway, he talks about in the book some of the things that he instituted, like Mark, you talking about the captains. He usually actually, after they chose their captains each year, the mothers of the captains on his football team held a very special place each year in the fabric of that organization. And I've seen at the collegiate level, I've seen various organizations through sponsorships and boosters be weaved into the fabric the same way. And I'm sure, you spent a little bit of time interestingly enough, doing that. Well, I got to ask Coach Lustig, after seeing a few, as both a fan, an alum, and a football guy, after seeing a few of Coach Baber's famous post-game fire-up speeches, it's got to be a pretty exciting place to coach on a basis in terms of the environment for Syracuse football right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. What you see is what you get right there with Coach Babers. I mean, he is an awesome guy to be around. As dynamic a personality that I've ever met in my life. Just from his presence, he's a big, tall guy and good-looking guy that is very articulate and very passionate. Awesome guy to work for. Really, really one of the best coaches I've ever worked for, and then a great family guy too. He's got 4 daughters, beautiful girls that are very successful, and really cares about the guys that not only are playing for him, but the guys that are working for him as well. So Yeah, I've learned a lot from him too. And man, to talk about culture, there's some things that I've picked up from him that if I get the opportunity to be a head coach again, I'll certainly steal from him.
Well, I want to start kind of working our way toward winding down here, and when I think about uh, programmatically, when you think about great programs, you hear the words storied programs, blue bloods. Of course, I live here in Kentucky, where we've got University of Kentucky is a blood basketball program. Interestingly enough, I learned recently that there are only four Division I colleges in the nation whose basketball programs make more money than their football programs. And three of those schools were schools that I have one way or another been a part of, and that's UK and U of L, where I live, and Syracuse and Duke. And I don't think it surprises anybody, not that the football program doesn't make more money, but that the basketball program does, just because of
Yeah.
the success that Coach Himes had. When you start talking about that, when you get into the the impression, the outward impression that's built, the history, the culture, when you start to talk about those types of things, what do you think exists today that are bigger challenges? And Mark, you may have touched on this. I'll turn to you first. Um, what today do we talk about that are bigger challenges in terms of that versus, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago when I was playing ball? I mean, I can remember even as early as the third grade having a coach tell me that water was highly overrated. Just shut up and keep running. So I do agree with you that we are a softer country, as it were. But what do you think today? What makes developing that type of stuff more difficult today in the environment we live in?
Well, I would say social media is a huge part of that. The young men and women growing up today have so many more influences pulling at them in all different directions. When we talk about buy-in, and I think that's another part that goes into culture, is about the buy-in. We talk about, let's talk about the football game. You only are guaranteed 10 opportunities a year. Obviously the coach is at the college level at 11, some have 12. But you have 48 minutes to play in a lifetime to remember. And we really try to emphasize that, as, you got to put your best foot forward. You only have one shot a week. You're not playing, and this is not a knock on any other sports. It's a lot of sports can play 2 or 3 times a week. For football, you have to practice all that time to play one time. And to me, I try to emphasize that part of it, is that we don't want to do anything to jeopardize that, whether it be discipline or academics. You don't want to miss out on that opportunity. It's the influences that kids are, again, as a school counselor and a head football coach, I think it's a perfect job opportunity for me to impact students in a variety of ways. I like to be out in the hallway. I like to make connections, whether they're a football player or not. They need to know where their go-to people are, the directions and the influences that they're getting from outside from everywhere. So as I said about social media, I kind of got myself tongue tied again. Here we go. I started to get on my soapbox, and then I lost my train of thought. I hate it when that happens. But I do believe social media plays a huge role in the distractions and the influences on our young people today.
Yeah, when I was in the Army, I was first assigned over in Germany to a group that was on border patrol back when the Cold War was going on. And that was back when the Army and other militaries controlled weapons of mass destruction. So we really had to be careful. And today I used to lovingly refer to this as the weapon of mass distraction. I think there was one study that was done that said that kids today have attention spans shorter than a goldfish. So it's really it's really tough when you start trying to figure out ways to overcome that, not only in reducing the risks as far as risks to your program, whether it be student safety risk on the football field, educational risk, whatever it is inside the program. Coach, at the collegiate level, And for you at Syracuse, what do you see? And with the experience, obviously you've accumulated multiple levels, but what do you see are the major challenges with regard to maintaining that productive culture in an environment at the college level right now?
Well, I mean, I'd like to, I think Mark and I would get along on a lot of this stuff, hearing him talk. But, you talk about grit, right? We've got two boys, my wife and I, two young boys, and they're going through all the youth sports, right? And I think about the whole participation trophy era, right? And I remember like when our oldest son first started playing sports, and he's in some of these leagues, and they're not keeping score, right? And that just blew my mind that you're playing a game where they're not keeping score. And I get some of the positives that may come out of that, but in my opinion, like our job as parents is to make our boys resilient, right? Like I want my sons to be tough. I want them to be gritty. I want them to be able to, when there's going to be a lot of bad stuff that's going to happen to Sam and Hank, or our two boys, and there's going to be a lot of bad stuff that's going to happen to them. I know that's going to happen, right? And they're going to hopefully push themselves to get into a lot of different things that are going to be challenging, and they're not going to have success all the time. And I think one of the things I've found is that we're just getting a lot of kids, especially at the higher level I've coached at, that aren't used to losing, right? Like they don't know, especially like, I'm coaching the receivers, right? And a lot of the receivers that I'm getting are 6'3" and 200 pounds, and they ran 4.4, and they were the biggest and the fastest guy on the field and the most athletic in most of the games that they played in. And now all of a sudden they're going to get challenged by that same athlete that's across from them, and they're not going to win 100% of the time. And now they're going to have to learn to be coached, and they're going to have to learn how to get technique and get up in the morning and be challenged by these other athletes who are just as good. And man, when the freshmen come in, it really hits a lot of them hard that, hey, I'm not the best guy on the field, and I'm not just going to step in here and get playing time right away. And oh crap, I was first team All-State in high school, and now all of a sudden I'm third or fourth on the depth chart on my team. I've never been third or fourth on the depth chart of the team. And I think that's always been the case in college athletics, right? At a lot of different levels, and it's the same at Enbro. But what's different now is the kids weren't brought up to learn how to deal with that. They weren't brought up to learn how to deal with not being the best and not losing and not losing a one-on-one and how you're going to react and what your body language is going to be. So that's a struggle constantly for us is trying to hit that part of the culture. And one of the things we said at Enbro all the time was control what you can control. Like that was really big, right? Another thing that I think I found is a lot of kids, as they're growing up and maturing, they want to point fingers, right? They want to say, I'm not playing because this coach doesn't like me, or I'm not playing because blah, 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 or I didn't get a good grade because the teacher didn't, understand what I was trying to write, or, the list goes on and on. You got to control what you can control. Worry about the things that you can control. And sometimes, playing time, you may not be able to control it, what the coach is saying or what the coach's decision is going to be, but you can control your effort, and you can control your detail and how you're going to practice, and you can control your toughness. So those are the things that you got to concentrate on. And I think we're constantly dealing with that with all of our athletes. And then the other piece I think I would mention that stands out to me is the team aspect of football, right? Like this is a team, and putting the team in front of yourself and understanding how valuable that ultimately is to yourself, right? Like I think that's really important for these guys to understand that, like, the more success we'll have as a program, there's a very high chance that you're going to get drafted higher at our level, right? And everybody wants to go to the NFL. And guys don't understand, like, even I think about high school kids that we're recruiting, right? I really don't care how many yards a running back had rushing. I really don't care how many yards he had receiving. I don't even look really, very rarely are we looking at the stats. We're looking at the highlight film. And we're looking at, man, can he go up and high point a ball? How physical is he when he's blocking? What's his high school coach say about him off the field and on the field and in the weight room and in the classroom? Like, those are the things that are important, not how many yards you're catching, or not how many yards that you're getting receiving, or not how many catches. And then also, it is real important if you're coming from a winning program, because now ultimately you're probably used to being coached the way that you're going to get coached at our level. And so, I think those two things really stand out. Just, trying to develop resiliency or grit, and then developing that team culture are two things that are year after year. And this is going to be my 20th year coaching, and I think it's gotten harder and harder every year to deal with those things.
You
John,
brought
can I
up so
jump
many.
in?
Yeah, absolutely,
Sorry.
Coach.
All right, I was listening to Coach Lustig talk, and I'm going, yeah. I'm just like, I'm buying into this the whole control the controllables and the team concept, and the more success we have as a team, the more individual success we're going to have. And I'm listening to him, and we're sitting here, and I'm going, the one thing about the character piece that and the other part about is also coaching the parents as well, and saying it's okay to fail. It's okay to let them fall down and skin their knees. Let them figure out how to get back up. And I think we're in that position now as coaches that we can have a huge impact, not just in the game of football. And I know I love what you're doing, John. I really, really do. And I'm right there with you on the passion part of trying to grow the game and keeping the game at a high level. But basically, in allowing people to we're coaching kids that it's okay to fail, and that when you do fail, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You're not alone. We're here to pick you up. We're here to help you learn something from it and grow from it. And then let's get over it. And then you talk about coaching tough. We talk to our guys all the time. Listen, when we're not getting on you, there's a problem. That we've, the old saying in the NFL, when they stop talking to you, you might as well get your playbook ready because you're heading to the coach's room. But the character piece of these things that we're doing too, it goes right in hand with culture and grit, and we're coaching everybody around us. Is that it's letting kids know that they're not alone. Number one. Number two, it's okay to fail. It is okay to fail. And to Coach Lustig's point is that these guys got to go. And I've been telling our receiver who's being recruited and been offered by Syracuse, you're going to have to go up there and prove yourself all over again. So I'm going to be even tougher on you now because I want you to be prepared to get ready to go. Yeah, you might be the top dog right now, but in about 2 short years, you're going back to the bottom. And so it's that character, that culture, the grit, and it's okay to fall down. Figure out how to get back up, and let's drive on. So I had to get on my soapbox here with Coach Lustig a little bit. He got me fired up.
Yeah, I'm fired up
No,
too. And I'll take that one step further. Like the fail piece, it's not only is it okay, it's good to fail, right? Like the only way we're going to learn is by making mistakes. And the only way we're going to learn is by failing. And, I could take that in so many different ways, right? From coaching the punt team at Syracuse. And if I never had gotten a punt blocked in my whole life, I never would have learned the issues that to get that better, that protection better, and that scheme better. And you're only going to do that by making mistakes. And like what we tell our players all the time, it's okay to make a mistake. You just don't want to make the same mistake twice, right? Like you don't want to continue to be making the same mistakes over and over again. But you make one mistake and you learn from it, that's a positive. That's a great thing.
Yeah. A failure is not a failure unless you learned a lesson from it.
No doubt.
Well, and it's true. And the thing is it's what I find at the parent level, there are too many parents out there that want to step in and save their child and they for whatever reason they were either taught or are under the impression that failing makes you a failure, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think it's Will Smith that famously said, fail forward, fail often, or whatever. I think that the two things that I have probably carried with me over the past few years, and certainly these have been touched on by a number of different coaches that I've had the blessing to interview. I was sitting down with Larry Centers, former Cardinals running back and probably the greatest receiving fullback in the history of the NFL. And, he talked about, if you ever watch him run the ball, he was a beast. But he talked about when he first started playing football, he didn't like the contact. He didn't like how brutal it was, and he used to complain about playing time. He said, until someone stood me up and said, hey, don't worry about what they're doing on the field. Worry about what you have to do and what you can control to get yourself on the field. Cal Newport wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And that's really the philosophy with which he continued to push forward as he went through his career. Be so good they can't ignore you. He said I used to practice so hard that the games almost seemed easy. And I think that the piece you both touched on of this couple of generations of parents not being willing to let their kids fail or stepping in to save them, if you will, has created that dynamic to where the kids really don't understand. As Bill Lewis told me, he said the two things he used to coach his kids on. He said, I never coached anything other than attitude and effort, because you own both of those. He said, all I ever want to see is a positive attitude and 100% effort. And if you can do that, the rest will take care of itself. And I think all of that's true. And when you start talking about the grit piece, Mark, and certainly Coach Lustig, when you were alluding to, all the environmental influences, when you can start to have an impact on all of those so that the kids develop the type of character that are going to carry them beyond the football field. And when they get out of your program, the resulting benefit to you all as a program is you end up having them contribute to that kind of culture that you want to build. So I think those are important pieces. I want to give you guys each a parting shot, and this is more in line with what I've done in the regular season 1 episode, but not so much in the live stream. But part of the thing that I'm working on right now is the effort to get more kids playing more sports for more of their lives. I'm building a whole program and presentation around the word more, because 70% of kids in the United States stop playing youth sports by the age of 13. And a big piece of that is educating parents. So I'm glad, Mark, you touched on that. And Coach, you talked about, your own parenting experiences as well. And that really makes a big difference. But from a for the good of the game standpoint, if you're sitting down to talk to a kid in your program, coming into your programs, your current programs at Township and at Syracuse, what kind of things are you sharing with them to encourage them to contribute to the best possible way that they can within your program? Mark, I'll give the floor to you first.
Okay. Seemed like we froze up there a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. And the parting shot is play it all. I want our guys competing in every arena that they can. Competition is what makes you stronger. It looks better on a college resume that you were an involved student athlete. I want them to try to participate in as many sports as they can. Having been a guy that was so focused on playing ice hockey through high school, I kind of turned a blind eye to other things, and I regret that. And I try to use my own experiences to help empower the young men in our program. So that's an important part for me. And, having been a role player on 2 national championship football teams, again, a role player, I wasn't a 4-year starter. And when you talk about failure, I said failure is not a failure unless you learned a lesson from it. Moving forward is not only 11 guys can get on the field at one time, and I think it's important that you understand that being part of it is just as important. And it speaks to what you're talking about, JD, is about the fact that you're doing something positive and you're learning and you're growing in a different environment. So from a positive standpoint, from an opportunity standpoint, you want to get involved. And don't look at because you weren't a starter, because you didn't make it to the NFL, or because you didn't sign a 6-figure or 7-figure contract, or because you didn't get a full scholarship to college, that you're a failure. Being part of something is just as important, and it lends to more success. When you look at kids that are going to college to play Division III and Division II, those kids being part of a program, whether it be football or soccer or whatever, I'm just speaking to the whole gamut of things, is get involved. Is do something besides go home and play Xbox or Nintendo Switch, which is the big hot game right now. And I'm sure Coach Lustig can speak to that. My 24 and 21-year-old, my 21-year-old in the Army right now is sitting around playing a Switch, and he should be out there learning, but they're got him delayed, Coach JD. Let's get on these Army guys. Um, uh, but I love the quote about Will Smith, and never pass up the opportunity to teach. And it's not just about teaching your guys about how to handle themselves. I think about the handshake, and this pandemic that we're dealing with right now. It's like that was such an important part, and looking somebody in the eye, how important those are, and we're teaching those essential skills, those adulting skills at the high school level now, and that accountability piece that we really didn't even talk a whole lot about, which we could have a whole nother show on accountability. Um, wow, I love what I do, and I love what you're doing, and I think the last piece that I had written down here, I took a whole bunch of notes that we're coaching our parents too, that it's okay to let your son struggle or your daughter struggle. It's okay. And sometimes you have to remind that. And you talked about, look, I'm a parent. I have a 24, a 21, and a 20-year-old, and you know, of course I want a better life for them. We all want our kid. They're the most important people in our world, and I tell parents that all the time. I get it. I'm a dad, and coach is the second best thing you can be called after dad, and we're. I think we all can speak to that passion that we have for the game, and it's okay to fail. Stay humble and don't ever pass up the opportunity to teach a lesson from even the smallest detail. So the relationship piece goes into that too. So I don't want to go back to that point, but I guess that's my parting shot, and it was the best I got. So I'm going to turn it over to
No,
Coach
I
Lester.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. Coach Lustig, how about you from the standpoint of, you got a kid coming in, not a recruit, but an actual kid that's coming into the program for the first time. What type of things do you tell them now from a culture and character standpoint, to how they can contribute?
Well, I'm going to go back to kind of what you had asked earlier. I had a couple thoughts on that, and hopefully this will cover
Please,
this
please
answer.
do.
Um, the first thing, I can't agree with Coach more with the idea of playing as many sports as possible, right? Like get involved in everything, and that's important for us as recruiters when we're looking for guys to play at Syracuse or play at this level. You want guys that have a wide range of skills, right? Like that are I think basketball. I can look at basketball film and evaluate an athlete in so many different ways. I can look at baseball and see if a kid's playing in an outfield, can he track a ball? I mean, we could talk about that. Over the years, I coached special teams, and punt returners have gotten worse and worse and worse over the years. It's harder and harder to find guys that can catch a punt. And I believe that's because kids don't play baseball as much growing up. And they're not used to catching deep balls. Or, they're not catching fly balls like we did probably growing up where you're playing catch. And I remember with my dad, the thing I wanted him to do most was hit me fly balls, not grounders, fly balls. Like hit them way up in the air and see if I can catch it. And that doesn't happen as much anymore. And that skill is starting to be lost. And so now I've been on teams where we have 2 kids on the whole team, 100 kids that can catch a punt. It's like wild. And these are great high-level athletes. So playing as many sports as you can. The other piece I would say with that too is, like, I talked to my wife the other day, like I really want our sons to at least wrestle in one wrestling match in their life or box in one boxing match. Just do something where it is truly one-on-one and you are out on a stage and you have to compete one-on-one. And if you lose, you lose. But, you're out there in front of everybody and there's no other things controlling what's going to happen in that match. It's just you versus the other guy. So, again, that goes into all the youth sports, and growing up doing those things are going to be invaluable to you in all aspects of your life, not just being a college football player. The other thing I would mention that popped into mind is, and I tell our players this all the time, is do hard stuff. Like, do hard stuff. And we did that. Talk about the culture piece. That was a big thing for me at Enbro. Is I want our guys to do hard things. We did I don't know if you heard about this, JD, but we did a midnight Braveheart run through the woods on the north side of campus there at Enbro, and we basically got all the players out in the middle of the night. I believe we started at like 12:30, and they reported to the locker room at like 12 o'clock, and then we had a 2-mile run through the woods in the middle of February or maybe it was January, but it was snowing. I got video of it
That's
snowing.
awesome.
We told the kids to get dressed up, and some of the kids ran with no shirts on, and then we had booby traps. The coaches each had a station, and they had a booby trap they had to set up through this 2-mile course through the woods. So some of it was like the coach had a strobe light and a like Halloween mask, and he'd jump out there and push the guys around. Another coach had eggs, and he was egging the players as they were running through. But I think it's important to put yourself in a position where you got to do hard things, right? And especially growing up, playing sports is hard. It's hard nowadays. Some of it's hard. Being on time to all your practices, and man, the things that you're going to take away from that the rest of your life, when things get tough in college and when things get tough in the real world after college, those lessons that you learn from youth sports, especially football, to me are going to be huge for you. And then the last thing I'll say too is the relationship thing. I'll steal that from Coach Evans, but that's huge, right? I mean, like, you know, you're either living for your resume or you're living for your funeral. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, right? Like, you're living for your resume just to add a bunch of crap on your resume and what stats that you got. That's great, and how much money you got. But really what you're living for, in my opinion, is your funeral and who's going to show up at your funeral, who really cares about you. And the people that really care about you are the ones that you built great relationships with. And I think in my personal life, about, you know, a big chunk of my greatest relationships are the guys I played sports with, going back to the youth sports. And one of the cool things about this destructive mechanism right now, it does put you in contact with. I mean, man, I get Facebook messages from guys I played Little League baseball with, and how cool is that? To be able to, you know, we had a kid post one of our Little League baseball pictures on Facebook like a couple months ago, and man, brought back some really cool memories. So the relationship piece, I'll leave it with that, and appreciate what you're doing here, JD. This is awesome.
Well, I tell you, thanks. That's it. It's funny you bring that up, Coach, because I asked some athletes that I had coached to do some short vignettes for me that I plan on incorporating into some workshops I'm going to give, and that was the thing for 2.5 minutes that my daughter kept emphasizing. You know, and it wasn't. I mean, she said, you know, I was always coached. She said normally by my dad, but she said, you know, I was always coached whatever I was doing to have fun. And I can see that in her now as an adult being a teacher, because so much of teaching is coaching. And I think that that's great. So I want to thank Coach Mark Evans from Manheim Township High School, Coach Justin Lustig from Syracuse University, for taking the time out of their schedules. This live stream, like so many others out there, is not only giving people great content, but it's giving people a lot to think about. And I appreciate both you gentlemen sharing your expertise and your thoughts with us tonight. I wish you guys luck with the coming season, since it's starting to look positive, like we're going to actually play one. So we'll kind of keep it light and keep it going from there. But for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't done so, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the page down below. Make sure you set the notification bell to be reminded when we come on. And when you're out there doing things for football, make sure you're doing them for the good of the game. Take care. God bless.